one of the things that the Buddha taught, where he would say, he's like, I basically teach the end of suffering. So that's something that I've been thinking about, like, well, what does that even mean? Or what does that look like? Is there even such a thing? And, I think it's become clear that wanting to be free of unpleasant emotions is perhaps impossible, and nor would that be helpful. And I'm happy that there's actually an increasing number of people who have been speaking out against such emotional perfection models of awakening. And, for example, the spiritual teacher Adeshanti recently announced his retirement due to his ongoing struggles with PTSD. And, in your book, you also mentioned that you still have frustration in your marriage, despite being married for so long and being such a deep practitioner. So I really appreciate these kind of vulnerable shares, as they make it easier for the rest of us to embrace our humanness and imperfection. And, with all that said, I am curious, what do you think is, a better way for people to think about awakening and liberation? Because I do think there is this kind of view of like the end of suffering is like, things will be perfect or something.
Well, as I've said, when somebody has that fantasy, I would say that it's possible to have a life without pain or without disturbance, without vulnerability. I would say they're doing the best to take care of themselves in that moment with this, to me, fantasy. And if they came to me asking for opinions, I'd share that my thought that this is probably an out-of-date fantasy that probably has some pretty obvious limitations, but I'm not going to go out trying to convince people of that. But let's say somebody's asking like you are. I think that what's most reliable is what Trungpa Rinpoche told me right at the very beginning of my connection with him. I was describing this practice where I could generate this sort of experiential tunnel and go into it and come out with no thought at all, just rest in no thought. I was very proud of it and everything. So I was talking with him and he said, he had the high squeaky voice. He said, just be open. Just be open. And looking back, I think there was actually a transmission quality because it really impacted me. And that's been a reference that really makes sense to me ever since, which is to return to openness rather than come up with some, guidelines about how to get enlightened. So if somebody is willing to come back into immediate embodied openness, practice unconditional kindness, stay out of interpretations, do our best to keep our heart open while we're still taking care of ourselves, I think that it invites and perhaps potentiates a certain process that's already there. And it doesn't mean don't study and don't think about all those things, but I think the most powerful thing is a practice of openness. But that openness has to be immediate, embodied, experiential, not just intellectual, calm and clear and like that. I'm just as open to feeling closed as I am open to feeling open, or it's not unconditional openness. So it's openness to the full big mess of being a human, which is going to be arising every second, and then we're going to die, So, another quote of his that I like that's in the book is that the bad news is we're falling through the air without a parachute. The good news is there's no ground.
No ground. Yeah,
I think that's right. I love that one.
Yeah, I love it.
It's the same idea that we return to openness. We return to being so present that we continually undermine our impulse to try to hang on to something solid and some formula, even if it's a spiritual formula. So that would be my take.